Hi, I'm Erick Schonfeld with TechCrunch, and I've got Erick Ries, who is the author of The Lean Startup. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, The Lean Startup is a way to think about building products and companies, and it's gained a lot of currency in the past few years since you first came up with the term. Can you explain to us what does that mean? What is the Lean Startup methodology?
Sure. The word lean in Lean Startup comes from lean manufacturing, which was a really radically new way of thinking about how to build physical objects in the 20th century. But what makes something efficient when you're manufacturing it is really different than the kind of efficiency that startups are trying to achieve. Because the big challenge that we have as entrepreneurs is that we actually don't know what product we're trying to build. We don't yet know who our customer is going to be. We don't know how to build a sustainable business. And so the Lean Startup is a method for systematically testing to discover which elements of our vision and strategy are clever and which ones are actually crazy, and then systematically eliminating the crazy ones using that buzzword of the pivot to find a strategy that actually works.
So what are the main components of the Lean Startup methodology?
The first is learning to tell the difference between value-creating activities and waste. It turns out that in entrepreneurship, anything that doesn't lead to learning about how to build a sustainable business is a form of waste. And then the second key idea is to immediately take what we have learned and translate it into what we call a minimum viable product, the smallest version of a product that can enable us to start that process of learning. And then the third key idea is this thing we call the build, measure, learn feedback loop, which is it's not important how fast you can build things. It's not important how many things you can measure. It's not even how good a strategizer are you at the whiteboard. What matters is what's the fastest time you can get through that entire loop, as quickly as possible.
So a lot of people take minimal viable product to mean get a product out as fast as possible, whether it's good or not. And isn't there a danger that people will put out a product before it's ready and make a bad first impression? You only get one chance to make a good first impression, right?
Yeah. In fact, I would say it's inevitable that the first product is going to be bad in some ways. And so the issue is not how to have the biggest launch for that crappy product. It's exactly the opposite. It's to take advantage of the fact that when you're starting out, you only have a pathetically small number of customers. So nobody knows who you are. If you piss off some customers, there's not very many of them. You can apologize to them individually. So while it's small is the time to be making the inevitable mistakes we make when we first try to make our vision a reality. So the problem with launching something that's not good is the launching, not the making it not good. What we want to do is separate out the product launch, so the showing the product to customers, separate that from the marketing launch or the press launch where we're trying to get as many customers as possible. Because remember, our goal is not to make as much money as possible or get as many customers as possible in the early days. Our goal is to learn as quickly as possible. And oftentimes, customers try to get too many customers too fast and wind up pissing off a lot more people that way.
So does this only work for unknown startups? What if you're a big company that people look at everything that you put out? I mean, Apple could never do this. Every product they put out has to be perfect, right?
Yeah, well, products where you're going to do a big public launch using an established brand name, you can't do this. But that doesn't mean that big companies can't do this kind of innovation. They just have to do it behind closed doors or under a different brand name, which a lot of big companies actually do. I think the mistake that big companies make is they slap their famous, first-tier brand onto things that aren't ready for that kind of treatment, not just because the product's not good enough, but because they don't understand their new customers well enough to really be willing to make that kind of guarantee that the brand has. So I often recommend both to famous entrepreneurs for whom there's going to be a lot of scrutiny for everything they do, and also for famous brands to simply launch the products under a completely different name. Don't tell anybody that you're doing something. Don't pound your chest. Don't put out a press release. Just put it in front of potential customers and see how they react.
And how do you know when you have a viable product?
Well, a big part of the book is trying to take this concept of product market fit and put it on a quantitative basis so that we can actually tell if we're making progress towards having a viral loop that's working, having an engagement business that's working, or having what we call the paid engine of growth, where the cost of acquiring a customer is less than the money that we make per customer.
What does that mean? I hear that a lot, product market fit. What exactly does that mean?
So I believe that the core idea is that when you have a product that really matches what customers want in a market, then like this growth happens almost by magic. Customers are basically pulling product out of you, and you can't keep the product on the shelves. The growth is exponential. It's really exciting. So problem with that concept is that you pretty much know it when you see it. You know, it's like, okay, Facebook has product market fit. Yeah, we got that. You know, the old Lotus 123, I think it sold like $54 million in their first year and went public the next year. Okay, that's product market fit. But for those of us who don't have that experience, where we're laboring to try and get to product market fit, that concept actually doesn't help you tell if you're making progress or not.
Right. There's this sense, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs that maybe have spent 6 to 8 months to a year to longer building a product. They've invested a lot in that product, right? And they feel that it's the best product possible because they thought a lot about it.
Yeah.
And they put it out there, and sometimes they rationalize that, okay, well, it just needs to get into the right hands before it takes off.
That's right.
But you're saying that if it doesn't take off immediately, you're doing something wrong.
That's basically right. And again, it's not that it's a disaster if it doesn't take off immediately. We shouldn't expect it to. What we need to do is figure out how do we get it into a better form? How do we improve the fit with the market for what we're building? And so, you know, I call it the just do it school of entrepreneurship. It's basically, let's just ship a product and see what happens. It's work on it, make it as good as we can, think about it as much as possible, and then throw it out there and see what happens. And the problem with that approach is you're guaranteed to succeed.
Does this only work with software products and web products where you can change things? You can change the entire product in a few days, right?
Certainly, if you're doing a software or a web-based product, you have no excuse to not do this. I mean, the tools are the best there. But what we're seeing in a lot of different industries is that the underlying cycle time is coming down. The ability to change and iterate products is getting easier and easier as the years go on. And also, the amount of market uncertainty that companies face is going up. Because the traditional tools that we've been taught as functional specialists, as engineers, as managers, are really around planning and forecasting, like the traditional tools of accounting to make a plan and then go successfully execute that plan. And those tools only work when we have a long and stable operating history to base them on. And of course, does anybody feel like the world is getting more and more stable every day? Of course not.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this whole idea was born in the downturn and gained currency in the downturn. And in a way, I almost think that entrepreneurs and even investors latched onto it because it was a justification of the way that they had to build their their startups. Today we're in a different world where a lot of capital is flowing into these startups. There's a lot of money. Can you build a lean startup in a bubble?
Yeah, not only can you, I think it's even more important in a bubble because it is so easy to blow through a ton of money doing what we call success theater. Just, it's almost like buying Super Bowl ads in the dot-com bubble. That's the kind of activities that people are doing tons of extra press and launch activities, trying to just get as many gross numbers, what we call vanity metrics, as possible. It's actually a huge waste of money. And so by being more rigorous about evaluating whether we're making progress, whether the work that we do every day actually matters to anybody, actually testing that empirically, we can prevent that kind of excess and actually save the money for when we know what we're talking about, we know how to spend it well.
What are the vanity metrics and what are the real metrics?
Yeah. Vanity metrics are the numbers you want to publish on TechCrunch to make your competitors feel bad. Okay, that is a time-honored tradition in startups. Like I have 3 billion messages sent on my new social network. I think I just saw that the other day. Billion messages sent. Wow, that seems like a lot.
A billion is always a good number.
Yeah, exactly. Except, is it really? Does that mean that you have 1 billion people who all sent one message or one guy with a really excited web browser? We don't know. There's no actual information in a number like that except that like a lot of stuff's going on and you don't know how much did it cost you to get those billion customers? Are they all in the process of churning out? It's actually not very useful. It's almost deceptive to put those kind of numbers out. The alternative is what in the Lean Startup movement we call actionable metrics, which are metrics where if you look at them, you would know what to do to get more of them. So you take something like billion messages sent. It's like, well, now I want 2 billion messages sent. What do I do? It's like, I don't know. Maybe the things we did before, we could do them again, but you can't launch again, so that's not going to, it doesn't really help you understand what are the actual drivers of your growth, what we call the engine of growth. So an actionable metric, by contrast, would be something like a cohort-style metric. If you look at the early data that people put out about Facebook, it was all of this style. It was like, instead of saying we have a zillion trillion users, they said, of the users we got this month, 90% of them come back every day to Facebook, right? Between the time we launched on a certain campus and the time we had 90% penetration on that campus was 3 weeks. Those are actionable metrics because it's very easy to see what do you need to do to keep doing that. It's like, well, okay, if this cohort's behaving this way, we can do the same thing with the next cohort. So it's an attempt at a more replicatable assessment of what's working. The gold standard is taking it all the way to an A/B split test.
Right. Ben Horowitz, he talks about the fat startup.
Yeah.
And that in some markets, in some cases, you just have to make a big bet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest counterexample to that recently is Color, which
Sure.
raised more than $40 million, and their first product, they weren't allowed to fail privately, right? Because there's too much attention on them. They're still doing something else, and we'll see how that goes. But their initial launch colored, to use the same term, colored the way people look at their company and their product. So, are there cases where it makes sense to just sort of buckle down, hire 50 engineers, and make something really transformative? Spend $10 million on it?
Yeah, that part of it, hiring a lot of people, taking the big bet, raising a lot of money, there's actually nothing wrong with that. In a lot of businesses, that's what's required to do the minimum viable product. In order to learn whether your transformational technology is going to work, there's often a lot of technical risk or other really difficult problems that need to be solved just to find out. I think the irony of the so-called fat startup is that Ben Horowitz and I actually don't have any disagreement. I don't think the lean startup says whether you should raise a lot of money or not. That's like saying, should I eat a lot of calories or not? It's like, well, if you're Lance Armstrong and you're really lean, you actually can eat quite a few calories and use them productively, whereas a different person who's living a slothful lifestyle, that's not going to work out that well. It's the same thing with startups. You pour a lot of money into the right kind of startup, you're going to see exponential growth. The issue is that we confuse the exhaust with the engine. We see, oh, look, that car is going really fast, it's putting out a lot of exhaust. Let's get a lot more exhaust. That's the thing that will make the startup go fast. And we just throw in the nitro into an engine that's not ready, and we get the kind of explosion we saw with Color. But to be clear, the issue with Color, and I don't know the inside details at all, but just from what I've seen in the press, the issue was the launch, not the raising of the money. If nobody knew that they had raised all that money, if nobody knew who they were, if they just put out a product quietly and seen how customers reacted, then yeah, when their first 100 or 1,000 customers hated it, that would have been no big deal. Just what you said. They could have failed in private. They could have really reduced the cost of failure. And I think it would have worked out much better.
And you told me something before, that obscurity is sometimes an entrepreneur's biggest advantage.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
A lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're in a rush to be famous. We're in a rush to get lots of attention, and we want to tell the world about how great we are. And I understand we want to write home to mom and say, hey, hi, mom, I did great. But the truth is that being obscure, having a pathetically small number of customers, is a huge advantage because it allows you to make mistakes and fail at no cost. But the other cool thing about it is when you have a pathetically small number of customers, you can get to know each and every one of them extremely well. If you screw up, you can apologize. You can call up each individual customer and say, I'm sorry we sent you that bad product. Let me do something better for you. Let me see if I can make it better. And so the opportunity for learning is actually heightened when you're in that environment. So I think don't be in a rush to get big. Be in a rush to have a great product, and then ride the great product to success. And if you look at the actual true stories of the companies like Apple and Google and eBay, a lot of those companies didn't even raise money, certainly weren't pounding their chest talking how great they were until they already had significant customer traction.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And check out The Lean Startup, which comes out in September. And until then, where can they learn about this? Leanstartup.com?
TheLeanStartup.com. My blog is Startup Lessons Learned.
There you go. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.